Nala Bennett had 72 hours to authenticate a painting worth $3 million. She had no idea it would cost her everything, her career, her freedom, and nearly her life, all because she fell in love with the wrong man, or maybe, for the first time, exactly the right one. The UV light hummed in the silence of her conservation studio, casting everything in an eerie purple glow. It was just past midnight, and she was alone, or at least she thought she was. The ancestral portrait lay on her examination table, a 19th century Korean masterpiece that had survived wars, revolutions, and God knows what else. Her job was simple: clean it, restore it, authenticate it, get paid, move on. Except nothing about this job had been simple from the start. She adjusted the angle of the UV lamp, and that's when she saw it. Beneath centuries of yellowed varnish and deliberate overpainting, there were words. Not Korean characters like she expected, but a mix. Korean military terminology blended with English phrases she recognized from her grandmother's old letters. Coordinates, dates, August 1953, and a name that made her blood run cold. Marcus Bennett, her grandfather. She leaned closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. This didn't make sense. Her grandfather was a soldier during the Korean War, sure, but he'd never mentioned knowing the Choi family. He'd died when she was 12, broke and forgotten in a South Side nursing home. What the hell was his name doing in a painting worth more than he'd earned in his entire life? She reached for her camera to document the discovery, and that's when the lights went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, just gone. The UV lamp died with them, plunging the studio into absolute darkness. Her hand froze mid-air. The kind of security system she had didn't just fail. Someone had cut the power, someone who knew what they were doing. She heard him before she saw him. The soft whisper of expensive shoes on concrete, the barely audible sound of controlled breathing. Then a voice, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as dangerous, cut through the darkness. "What did you find?" Her survival instinct screamed at her to lie, to play dumb, to pretend she'd seen nothing. But her mouth, as always, had other plans. "Something your family doesn't want found." Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in dim red, and there he was, Kang-min Choi, the client's grandson, the man who wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow morning. He stood 10 feet away, perfectly still, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. His face was all sharp angles and colder eyes, beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful. And in his right hand, held low but unmistakable, was a gun. Not pointed at her, not yet, just there, a promise, a question. He took one step closer, and she watched his gaze move from her face to the painting, then back again. When he spoke, his voice carried the faintest trace of an accent, Korean inflection wrapped around perfect English. "Show me." Nala should have known something was wrong when they offered her $200,000 for a 3-day job, but when she'd spent the last 5 years being the diversity hire at every museum and gallery from Chicago to New York, when her student loans had student loans, when her 73-year-old mother was still working double shifts because she couldn't afford to retire her yet, well, she didn't ask too many questions. She just said yes and tried not to look desperate while doing it. The email had come through her university account. Professional, vague. A private collector needed a rush authentication on a 19th century Korean ancestral portrait. Confidential, time-sensitive. Would she be interested? The attached contract had more zeros than she'd seen outside of her debt statements. She'd replied within 6 minutes. Now, standing in her studio with a gun casually occupying the same space as her Tuesday night, she was rethinking her life choices. Kang-min moved closer to the examination table, his eyes fixed on the painting like it held the secrets of the universe, which apparently it did. She watched him study the hidden text beneath the UV residue on her gloves, the faint glow of coordinates and coded phrases that had been buried under 60 years of deliberate concealment. "Your dissertation," he said, not looking at her. "Code switching and post-war art, cultural linguistics as encryption methodology. University of Chicago, 2019. I read it." She blinked. That paper had like 4 downloads. 2 of them were my mother. I was the third. Now he did look at her, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close, a crack in the ice. "You argued that soldiers created hybrid communication systems during the Korean War, blending languages and cultural references to transmit information their superiors couldn't intercept. You called it code resistance. I called it a theory. I didn't have proof. You do now." He gestured at the painting. "This is what happens when a Korean officer and an American soldier need to hide something even their own people can't find. Your grandfather and mine created a code that's lasted 60 years because nobody else speaks both languages." Her throat went dry. You knew before you hired me." "Of course I knew. Why else would I pay $200,000 for a 3-day job?" He slipped the gun back inside his jacket with the casual ease of someone who wore weapons like accessories. "You're not here because you're the best conservator in Chicago, Nala. You're here because you're the only person alive who can read this message." The use of her first name felt invasive, intimate. She hated how her pulse kicked up at the sound of it in his mouth. "And I refuse?" His expression went flat, professional. "Then the forgery charges my family will file tomorrow morning will destroy you. We have documentation that you authenticated 3 pieces last year that were later discovered to be fakes. We have financial records showing payments from the forgers to your accounts. We have emails you never wrote but have your digital signature." "That's fabricated?" "Yes. Also completely airtight. You'll spend the next decade fighting charges you can't afford to defend against. Your career ends. Your mother loses her house because you'll need to liquidate everything for legal fees, and you'll still probably end up in prison." She wanted to hit him, wanted to throw something heavy and historically significant at his perfectly symmetrical face. Instead, she crossed her arms. "You're a real prince, you know that?" "I've been called worse." He pulled out his phone, typed something, then showed her the screen. A wire transfer, $500,000, pending her account information. "Help me decode this message, get paid exceptionally well, walk away with your reputation intact and enough money to retire your mother, pay off your debts, and fund whatever research project you want for the next 5 years. Or lose everything by sunrise." He pocketed the phone. "Your choice." She looked at the painting, at her grandfather's name hidden beneath layers of history and lies, at the coordinates that probably led to something dangerous enough to warrant guns and threats and elaborate blackmail schemes. She should have walked away, should have called the police, her lawyer, someone with better survival instincts than her own. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'm going to need better lighting and coffee, and if you're going to lurk over my shoulder all night, you're at least going to make yourself useful." Kang-min's mouth curved. Definitely a smile this time. Small, but real. "I can work with that." The code was a beautiful disaster. Korean military grid references tangled with phrases Nala's grandmother used to mutter when she thought no one was listening. On the down low appeared next to coordinates that probably pointed to something buried in 1953. "Ain't no thing" preceded what looked like financial account numbers. Someone had taken 2 worlds that should never have touched and braided them together like DNA strands. She pulled out her notebook, started transcribing. Kang-min had dragged over a chair, expensive leather that looked ridiculous next to her thrift store examination table, and was watching her work with the intensity of a man studying bomb defusal instructions, which, for all she knew, this was. "Cool it means wait," she said, pencil scratching across paper. "But here it's next to ship out, which is military. So delayed deployment? No, wait." She squinted at the faint text. It's paired with jingcha, which is Korean for really or seriously. So it's not about deployment, it's about authenticity. Keep it real. Don't move the package until you verify it's legitimate. How do Kang-min started? My grandmother, born in Bronzeville, 1932. She could code switch between 3 different registers of English depending on who was in the room. White folks got one version, black folks got another, and her prayer circle got a third. She taught me that language isn't just communication, it's survival. She glanced up at him. Your grandfather would have learned that fast in a segregated army. Something flickered across his face. Not quite pain, but close. The Eighth Army was integrated by 1951, on paper. Right, and I'm sure the mess halls and barracks got that memo. She tapped the painting. This code exists because your grandfather and my grandfather had to talk where nobody else could listen. Not their officers, not their enemies, not even their own people. Kang-min leaned forward, studying the text. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and cedar-based that probably cost more than her car. What's bread mean in this context? Money. Bread is cash. But look, it's modified by holy, which isn't slang. That's got to be Korean influence. Holy bread. Consecrated money. Something sacred that can't be touched or stolen. Church funds? Or family assets hidden during the war? She pulled up a reference photo on her laptop. The North Korean invasion in 1950 displaced millions. Wealthy families buried gold, cash, artifacts, anything they could hide before fleeing south. If your grandfather was helping evacuate civilians, he could have been entrusted with family treasures. Kang-min's voice went quiet, careful. Things that were supposed to be returned after the war. Were they? His expression went blank, corporate. My family doesn't speak about the war. Convenient. Necessary. He stood abruptly, moved to the window overlooking the street. My grandfather built an empire from nothing, came to Chicago in 1954 with $200 in a suitcase. 20 years later, he owned half the South Side real estate. Another 20, and the Choi family was untouchable. Built from nothing, she repeated, or built from something he was supposed to give back. Kang-min turned, and for the first time since he emerged from the shadows, he looked almost human, tired, burdened. That's what I hired you to find out. They stared at each other across her cramped studio. The UV lamp hummed. Outside, Chicago traffic murmured its midnight symphony, and somewhere in the space between them, she felt it, that dangerous shift when your captor stops being a threat and starts being a person. She broke eye contact first, safer that way. Are you going to hover over me all night, or you actually want to help? What do you need? Cross-reference these coordinates with 1950s soul maps and stop looking at me like I'm going to spontaneously decode the secrets of the universe. It's distracting. The corner of his mouth lifted, barely, but there. I'll try to contain myself. Please do. I work better without an audience. Noted. But he didn't move away. Just pulled out his phone and started searching for historical maps, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Almost. She went back to the code, but her concentration was shot to hell, because somewhere between the threats and the blackmail and the impossible task she'd been handed, she'd started forgetting that Kang-min Choi was dangerous, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. By 3 a.m., they'd decoded about 40% of the message, and Nala's stomach was staging a violent protest. She grabbed her phone, pulled up her delivery app, and ordered from Sun's Kitchen without looking up from her notes. Kang-min glanced. Korean fried chicken at 3 in the morning? Sun's is open till 4. Extra crispy, pickled radish on the side, and if you're lucky, I'll share. She kept transcribing. They do this thing with gochugaru and honey that'll change your life. He'd gone very still, that particular Korean stillness that means someone had just been surprised in a way they didn't like. You know Sun's? Best yum-yum in the city. Mrs. Sun makes it fresh every morning. Her son David went to U Chicago with me. We studied art history together while eating our weight in tteokbokki. She finally looked up. What? I thought... He stopped. Started again. I assumed you'd order something more... More what? Soul food? Fried catfish? Sweet potato pie at 3 a.m.? She set down her pencil. Go ahead, say what you're thinking. His jaw tightened. I thought you'd be different. Different how? More urban? Less this? He gestured vaguely at her studio, the academic journals stacked everywhere, the Korean language reference books she'd pulled out. Less comfortable in spaces you thought belonged only to you? She leaned back in her chair. Let me guess, you thought black women came in one flavor and it didn't include speaking 3 languages and knowing the difference between Joseon and Goryeo dynasty painting techniques. To his credit, he didn't flinch. Yes, I'm sorry. The honesty landed harder than anger would have. She wasn't used to people actually admitting their prejudices instead of dressing them up in polite language. Well, she said finally, now you know better. Now I know better, he agreed quietly. The food arrived 20 minutes later. They ate in companionable silence, grease-stained fingers and shared containers, the tension between them shifting into something almost comfortable. Almost. She was reaching for another piece of chicken when the studio's back door exploded inward. Not opened, exploded. The reinforced steel buckled like cardboard, and a figure in black tactical gear came through low and fast, gun already raised. She saw the suppressor, saw the weapon tracking toward Kang-min, saw her death playing out in real time. Kang-min responded, moved like violence was a language he'd spoken since birth. He grabbed the examination table, 200 pounds of solid oak, and flipped it toward the attacker. The gunman fired, bullets punching through wood and canvas. The ancestral portrait took 3 rounds, 60 years of hidden secrets shredded in seconds. She screamed, not from fear, from rage. That was a priceless artifact, you psychopath! Kang-min was already on the attacker, moving with brutal efficiency. Elbow to the throat, knee to the solar plexus, a twist that made something crack wetly. The gun clattered away. The assassin wasn't done. He pulled a knife, lunged. Her hand found the nearest heavy object, a bronze sculpture of Frederick Douglass she'd been using as a bookend, and she swung it like Serena Williams going for match point. It connected with the back of the attacker's skull with a sound like a watermelon hitting pavement. He dropped. Kang-min stood over the unconscious body, breathing hard, blood on his knuckles. He looked at her, at the sculpture in her trembling hands, at Frederick Douglass's dignified face now dented and speckled with someone else's blood. Irony, she gasped. And then he was crossing the space between them, his hands cupping her face, and he was kissing her like the world was ending, and they were the only 2 people left alive to witness it. She should have pushed him away, should have remembered the gun, the threats, the power imbalance that made this wrong in every possible way. Instead, she kissed him back. His mouth tasted like gochugaru and honey and adrenaline, her hands fisted in his blood-spattered shirt, pulling him closer, desperate and stupid and so completely inevitable it hurt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing like they'd run a marathon, his forehead rested against hers. Someone just tried to kill us, she whispered. I noticed. This is insane. Completely. We should call the police. We absolutely should not call the police. His thumb traced her jawline, gentle despite the violence still humming in his muscles. That man was sent by my family to stop you from finishing the translation. Your family wants me dead? My family wants the past to stay buried, and now you're in the middle of a war you didn't ask to fight. Story of my life, she muttered. Then she looked at the ruined painting, the unconscious assassin, the disaster zone her studio had become. So what now? Kang-min's smile was sharp, dangerous. Now we finish what our grandfathers started. The security cameras in Nala's studio were something she'd installed 2 years ago. Basic stuff, motion-activated, uploaded to the cloud automatically. She'd completely forgotten about them until Kang-min's phone rang at 6 a.m. They were still at the studio, the unconscious assassin zip-tied in her storage closet, the ruined painting spread across her backup table as they worked frantically to photograph what remained of the code. Kang-min glanced at the caller ID, and every muscle in his body went rigid. "I have to take this." He stepped into the corner, spoke in rapid Korean. She caught maybe one word in 10, but she understood tone. Her grandmother wasn't calling to chat about the weather. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When he hung up, his expression had gone completely blank. What? Family meeting, now. He looked at her, and something in his eyes made her stomach drop. They know. Know what? Everything. He turned his phone toward her. On the screen was security footage from her studio. Timestamp, 4 hours ago. Crystal clear image of Kang-min kissing her like she was oxygen and he was drowning. Oh. "I have to go," he said. "Stay here, lock the doors, don't let anyone in." Kang-min, but he was already gone. She should have listened, should have stayed put, because she still had enough delusion left to think she could salvage some normalcy from this nightmare. The police were waiting at her apartment. They were very polite, very professional, showed her a warrant for her arrest on charges of fraud, forgery, and selling fraudulent authentication certificates. Documentation, evidence, her digital signature on contracts she'd never seen, 3 authentication letters she'd allegedly sold for pieces that turned out to be fakes with payments traced to her account. She kept saying it was a mistake, kept saying she'd never done any of this, kept thinking about Kang-min's warning from yesterday. "We have documentation, we have emails you never wrote." She put her in handcuffs in front of her neighbors. The holding cell smelled like bleach and desperation. She sat on the metal bench, still wearing her studio clothes, dried paint under her nails, and her career imploding in real time. By noon, the story hit the art world news sites. By 2 p.m., her university had put her on administrative leave. By 4, her phone, confiscated but visible through the processing window, showed 47 missed calls from former colleagues, all presumably calling to distance themselves from the scandal. The bail hearing was set for the next morning. She didn't make it that long. At 7 p.m., a lawyer in a suit worth more than her car appeared. 15 minutes later, she was processed out, charges under review, released on her own recognizance pending further investigation. Kang-min waited by a black Mercedes. She got in because she had nowhere else to go. They drove in silence for 5 blocks. Then, "My family did this." She laughed. It came out jagged. "You think?" "I'm working to reverse it. The charges will disappear by morning." "And my reputation, my career, does that disappear too? Or does it just die slowly while everyone I've ever worked with assumes I'm guilty?" She turned to face him. "What happened at the family meeting, Kang-min?" His jaw clenched. "My grandmother wants me to end this. She said, 'You're not our kind.' She means I'm black." "Yes. And what did you say?" I told her no. Something in her chest cracked. Hope, maybe, or just another breaking point. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you're in more danger than before. My uncle, the one who sent the assassin, he said you're probably planning to blackmail us, said your people always—" He stopped. I interrupted him before he could finish, told him if he completed that sentence, I'd forget we were family. How noble! And then what? Then my grandmother gave me an ultimatum. 1 week to break this and marry Ji Young Park, or I'll have no place in the family. The red light stopped. Outside, Chicago lived its normal Tuesday evening. People going home from work, couples holding hands, the regular world where art conservators didn't get framed for crimes they didn't commit and didn't fall for men who came with assassination attempts as relationship baggage. "Take me back to jail," she said quietly. "What?" "You heard me. Take me back. At least there I know who my enemies are." "Nala, I'm not your enemy." "Then what are you, Kang-min?" She turned to him, and everything she'd been holding back came pouring out. Because I can't be your secret. I can't be the thing you hide from your family while you play dutiful grandson and marry the appropriate Korean girl. I won't." The light turned green. He didn't move. "You think that's what I want? I don't know what you want. I just know what I refuse to be." His hand found hers, held it. "I want you. That's the problem." "No," she said. "The problem is wanting me isn't enough." The coordinates led to an old bank in Chinatown that looked like it had survived both world wars and several economic collapses through sheer stubbornness. Golden Prosperity Savings and Loan, established 1952, the kind of place that still used actual keys instead of digital access codes. Kang-min had the key, small brass worn smooth by decades of handling. He'd found it in his grandfather's effects after the funeral, labeled only with numbers that hadn't made sense until now. The bank manager, ancient and unfazed by their obvious desperation, led them down to the vault. Box 427. He inserted his master key, waited for Kang-min to insert his, and the lock clicked open with a sound like history exhaling. Inside was a leather portfolio, cracked with age. They took it to a private viewing room. Nala's hands shook as she opened it. Financial documents on top, account statements, wire transfers, asset inventories, everything labeled in that same hybrid code. But underneath, photographs. The first one showed two men in U.S. Army uniforms, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Young, maybe 20, one Korean, one black. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of soldiers took photos with their buddies. The second photograph was different. They sat close enough that their knees touched. The Korean soldier's hand rested on the other man's face, tender, intimate. The black soldier's eyes were closed, leaning into the touch like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. This was devotion, grounding, necessity. Then simply, no mistaking what this was. The third photo showed them kissing. Nala's "oh my God" was whispered awe, not shock. She was seeing her grandfather's hidden truth. Kang-min's reaction was with restraint, gone absolutely still, frozen. His face was carved from stone, but his hands trembled. The contradiction of rigid control and emotional earthquake. She read the first letter slowly, with reverence. "My dearest Marcus, the war has taken everything from me except you. If we survive this, I will build a life where we never have to hide again." She looked at the signature, Kang-min Choi. "That was your grandfather." He nodded, unable to speak. She pulled out another letter, this one in English, the handwriting loose and flowing. "Baby. You know I can't go back to Chicago and be who I really am. Not in 1953, not looking like me, loving who I love. But I got this wild dream that maybe, just maybe, we could build something different, something honest." Signed, Marcus Bennett. Her grandfather. The world tilted sideways. Marcus Bennett is my grandfather? This man? She gestured at the photographs, at the evidence of a love that had been buried for 70 years. He loved your grandfather? It would have destroyed everything. Kang-min's voice was hollow. A queer relationship, interracial, in the 1950s. My grandfather's family would have disowned him. Your grandfather's community would have killed him, she finished quietly. That's why they hid it. That's why the code exists. They weren't just protecting money, they were protecting each other. She kept digging through the portfolio, more letters, photos, and then financial records, not from the 1950s, recent, very recent. Wire transfers, account statements, 15 years of systematic embezzlement traced back to one name, Kang-min Choi, Kang-min's uncle. He's been stealing from the family for years, she said, spreading the documents across the table, using the missing war assets as cover, blaming it on your grandfather's supposed mismanagement. But it was never missing. It was right here, and your uncle has been... The viewing room door opened. Ji-young Park stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in prosecutor's armor, tailored suit, perfectly styled hair, and holding a gun like she'd been born with one in her hand. "You were supposed to marry me, Min," she said, her voice steady, cold. "We were supposed to rule together. I've been planning this since we were children, building cases, eliminating obstacles, working with your uncle to position us perfectly." Kang-min stood slowly. Ji-young put the gun down. "So you could fall for her?" She gestured at Nala with the weapon. "Some nobody who happened to be useful? I'm the one who's been by your side. I'm the one who's earned this." "By framing me," Nala stood too, "by helping embezzle from his family?" "By doing what was necessary," Ji-young justified. "And now I'm going to do what's necessary again." Her finger moved to the trigger. Kang-min moved faster than thought. He grabbed the table between them and flipped it toward Ji-young. She fired. The bullet punched through wood inches from Nala's head. Then they were running. Through the vault, up the stairs, Ji-young's heels clicking behind them like a metronome counting down to death. 2 more fire shots. One bullet took out a light fixture, the other shattered a window. They burst onto the street, into late afternoon traffic, into the regular world that had no idea they were fighting for their lives and for a love their grandfathers never got to claim. Kang-min grabbed Nala's hand. "This way." They ran like they were running from history itself. They holed up in a safe house on the north side, one of Kang-min's properties that wasn't officially registered to the family. 2 bedrooms, reinforced doors, and enough security cameras to make a prison warden jealous. His men brought the documents they'd rescued from the bank, along with laptops, scanners, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. 48 hours until Chuseok. 48 hours to build a case that would either save them or get them killed. Probably both. Kang-min spread out a blueprint of the family estate on the dining table. The ceremony happens in the main hall. 300 guests, politicians, business leaders, other families, everyone who matters in Chicago. He tapped the layout. "We expose everything publicly. My uncle's embezzlement, the truth about our grandfathers, all of it. They can't silence us without destroying their own reputation in front of witnesses who matter." "That's your plan? Public humiliation as a survival strategy? You have a better idea?" She didn't, which was terrifying. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. She'd been avoiding her call since the arrest, but she couldn't anymore. She stepped into the bedroom, closed the door, and answered. "Baby girl, what kind of trouble are you in?" No preamble, just maternal omniscience honed by 30 years of knowing her daughter was lying. "The complicated kind, Ma." "Does it have anything to do with Marcus's war history? Because I got a very strange call from someone claiming to be a Korean lawyer asking about your grandfather's service record." Nala sank onto the bed. "Ma, did your grandmother ever tell you anything about Granddad's time in Korea? About people he knew there?" Silence. Then, "Your grandmother knew Marcus was in love with a Korean man." The world stopped spinning. "What?" "She knew, baby. He told her before they got married. Said he'd loved someone during the war, someone he couldn't be with, and she needed to know his heart had belonged to someone else first." Her mother's voice softened. "She married him anyway. Raised you to be proud, to never hide who you love. She said that's what Marcus would have wanted, for his granddaughter to be braver than he got to be." Tears burned Nala's eyes. "I'm trying, Ma. And whatever you're fighting for, whoever you're fighting with, make sure it's worth it." She looked through the doorway at Kang-min, surrounded by his men, building a battle plan from their grandfather's buried love. It is. Then fight like hell and come home safe. The next 36 hours blurred together, scanning documents, creating encrypted backups, setting up a dead man switch that would release everything to media outlets if they didn't check in every 12 hours. Kang-min's loyal men, the ones who'd known his grandfather, who remembered him as more than just the family patriarch, worked with quiet determination. He was different after the war, one of them said, an old soldier named Mr. Kim who'd served under Hyun-woo in the early days. Sad, like he'd left part of himself behind. Now I understand why. Night fell, and it was just Nala and Kang-min in the safe house, surrounded by evidence of a love that had been forced into hiding, preparing to fight for one that wouldn't be. She found him on the balcony, staring at the city lights. "Is this love worth dying for?" she asked quietly. He turned, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Raw, vulnerable, completely unguarded. "I've been dead my whole life, Nala, playing the role my family wrote for me, becoming the weapon they sharpened. I've never wanted anything for myself." He crossed to her, cupped her face in his hands. "You're the first thing that made me want to live." She kissed him. No desperation this time, no adrenaline, just choice, deliberate and certain. They made it to the bedroom somehow, shedding clothes and armor in equal measure. His hands on her skin were reverent, worshipful, like she was something precious he couldn't believe he got to touch. She mapped the scars on his body, bullet graze on his shoulder, knife wound on his ribs, the physical history of violence written on his skin. "I see you, all of you, the parts you show the world and the parts you hide. I see you, and I'm not afraid." He entered her like coming home, and they moved together with the desperate tenderness of people who knew tomorrow might steal this away. When they shattered together, it felt like the universe realigning, like their grandfathers watching from whatever came after, and finally seeing the love they'd hidden lived out loud and unashamed. Afterward, tangled in sheets and each other, Kang-min traced patterns on her skin. "Tomorrow we burn it all down," he said. "Tomorrow we set it free," she corrected. He smiled, kissed her. Same thing. Outside, the city slept. Inside, they held each other and pretended they weren't terrified. They'd chosen each other, consequences be damned. Now they just had to survive them. The Choi family estate looked like something from a historical drama. Traditional Hanok architecture stretched across manicured gardens, all curved roof lines and ornate woodwork. Hundreds of guests milled around in formal attire, suits, designer dresses, traditional hanbok in jeweled tones. The annual Chuseok ceremony was Chicago's Korean community flexing its power and wealth in equal measure. Nala and Kang-min arrived in a black Mercedes, and the moment they stepped out together, the whispers started. She wore a custom hanbok in deep indigo, not traditional white or pastel, but royal blue that made a statement. The designer, a Korean artist who'd heard their story through Kang-min's network, had embroidered the hem with symbols, a paintbrush crossed with a soldier's rifle, art and war, Marcus and Hyun-woo, their grandfather's legacy worn like armor. Kang-min wore a traditional jeggery and baji in charcoal, his hand firm on her lower back as they walked through the garden toward the ceremony hall. People stared, phones came out. By the time they reached the entrance, she was trending on 3 different social media platforms. The grandmother waited at the entrance of the hall, flanked by the uncle and half the family elders. She looked like vengeance carved from ice. "You dare!" Her English was perfect, her fury palpable. "You dare bring this shame into our sacred ceremony, on the day we honor our ancestors." Kang-min's voice carried across the suddenly silent garden. "Our ancestors would honor the truth, grandmother. And the truth is that Nala's grandfather, Sergeant Marcus Bennett, saved your husband's life during the war. He protected our family's assets when he could have stolen them. He loved your husband when the world said that love was impossible." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kang-min continued his prosecution. "The 50 million you've been searching for, Marcus returned it, every cent. Was promised a partnership that was never honored. He died in poverty while our family built an empire on money that should have been shared. The only shame here is ours." The uncle stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "This is a lie, a fabrication by this woman to what? Tell the truth about your embezzlement?" Nala held up her phone, held it up. 15 years of wire transfers, account statements, all traced back to you. You've been stealing from your own family, blaming it on missing war assets that were never missing. Each accusation building, exposing him before hundreds. When the uncle's hand moved inside his jacket, Kang-min saw it first. Gun! Everything exploded. Armed men emerged from the crowd, the uncle's people, positioned throughout the ceremony. Guests screamed and scattered. The first shot shattered a decorative vase behind them. The second took out a paper lantern. Kang-min grabbed Nala and they ran into the ceremonial hall. Traditional Korean architecture became their battleground. She'd studied buildings like this for her dissertation, knew that the raised wooden floors were designed to be removed for ventilation, that the support pillars were weight-bearing, but the walls were decorative screens. "Left!" Nala shouted. Kang-min followed without question. They ducked behind a pillar as bullets chewed through rice paper walls. 3 of the uncle's men came through the main entrance. Kang-min moved with brutal grace, disarming the first, using his own weapon against the second. She grabbed a ceremonial brass incense burner, probably worth more than her car, and swung it at the uncle's knees. He went down hard. "Sorry, ancestors," she muttered aside. More gunfire. The hall's decorative ceiling beams splintered. Ji-young appeared through the smoke and chaos, still in her prosecutor's suit, gun raised and aimed directly at Nala's head. "He was mine," she screamed, "since we were children, since before you existed. Mine." Kang-min stepped between them. "Put it down, Ji-young." "Move!" "No. I will shoot through you to get to her. Then you'll have to. Because I'm not letting you hurt her. Not now, not ever." Ji-young's finger tightened on the trigger. Nala saw her making the calculation, saw her deciding that if she couldn't have him, no one would. Kang-min moved faster. He grabbed her wrist, twisted, and the gun discharged into the ceiling. Ancient wood rained down. He pinned her against a pillar, his forearm across her throat. "You were never hers to own," he said quietly. "I was never yours to own." Security flooded in, real security this time, not the uncle's corrupted men. The uncle himself was being restrained near the entrance, shouting about betrayal and lies, while evidence of his crimes played on every phone in the vicinity. Kang-min turned to Nala. The physical description mattered. Blood streaked his face from a cut above his eyebrow. His traditional clothes were torn and scorched. He'd never looked more beautiful. "You okay?" he asked. She laughed, slightly hysterical. "I just assaulted someone with a priceless artifact. I'm having a crisis." "Later. Crisis later. Survive now." He pulled her close, kissed her in front of 300 witnesses and every camera phone in Chicago. She kissed him back, not hiding, not ashamed. Exactly like their grandfathers should have been able to do. The uncle broke free from the security guards with the desperate strength of a man who knew he was finished, grabbed a fallen gun, swung it toward Kang-min, and Nala watched his finger start to squeeze the trigger. The shot that rang out didn't come from his weapon. The uncle stumbled, looked down at the blood spreading across his chest, then fell to his knees. Behind him stood the grandmother, still in her formal hanbok, holding a small pistol with the steady grip of someone who'd done this before. The entire hall went silent. "Amma!" the uncle gasped. "Why?" "Because," she said quietly, "I will not watch another generation destroy itself for pride." She walked past her dying son without looking at him, security and medical personnel rushing in around her. She moved with the deliberate grace of someone who'd made a choice and wouldn't be swayed from it. When she reached them and stopped, she did something that made the entire crowd gasp. She removed her hanbok jacket. Underneath, her shoulder was exposed, revealing a tattoo that had been hidden for decades. The ink was faded, old, but still legible. Marcus Bennett's name, written in both English and Korean characters, intertwined like a promise. She said, "I am Marcus Bennett's daughter," her voice carrying across the ceremonial hall, not loud, but absolute. She was claiming identity denied for 70 years. The family revelation, "Your grandfather, Kang-min, and I were half-siblings through Marcus," restructured everything they knew. Her explanation of rejection and adoption carried both pain and matter-of-factness. When my father's American family rejected him for loving a man, when they called him abomination and threw him out, my Korean mother took me in, raised me as her own, as fully Korean. The elders moved forward, shock and confusion rippling through them. The grandmother continued, each word deliberate. "I've lived a lie for 70 years. I hid half of who I am, my black heritage, my father's love, the truth of where I came from, because I was ashamed, because the world told me I should be, because it was easier to pass, to hide, to pretend I was something simple and acceptable, rather than something complicated and true." She turned to face the assembled crowd, and Nala saw tears on her weathered cheeks for the first time. "My father loved Kang-min Choi with everything he had. They saved each other during the war, protected each other, built something beautiful in the midst of horror. And when they came home, the world forced them to bury it, forced them to marry women they didn't love, build lives that felt like prisons, and die without ever being able to claim each other publicly." She looked at Nala now, really looked at her, and Nala saw recognition in her eyes. Family, blood, truth. "You are my granddaughter, Nala Bennett, through my father's line. You carry his name, his strength, his refusal to hide who you love, even when the cost is everything." Her hand reached out, trembling slightly, and touched Nala's face. "And I will not let fear win again, not in this family, not in this generation." The uncle had stopped breathing. Security was calling for ambulances. The guests stood frozen, phones out, recording the moment a Chicago dynasty imploded and rebuilt itself in the space of a confession. Kang-min's hand found Nala's, squeezed. The grandmother turned to him. "Your grandfather loved my father until the day he died. I watched him carry that grief like a stone in his chest. He built this empire trying to fill the hole Marcus left behind, and it was never enough." She placed her hand on Kang-min's cheek. "Don't make his mistake, grandson. Don't sacrifice love for legacy. The legacy isn't worth it." One of the family elders stepped forward, ancient, stern. This cannot be true. The family records were altered by me with Hyun-woo's help," the grandmother said flatly. "We erased Marcus from our history because acknowledging him meant acknowledging truths we weren't brave enough to face." She straightened, regal despite everything. "But I'm 87 years old. I've spent enough of my life lying. However much time I have left, I'm going to spend it living in truth." She looked at Nala and Kang-min standing together among the wreckage of the ceremony, covered in blood and smoke and the evidence of a battle they'd won. "Starting with this," she said, "my grandson loves this woman. She is family by blood and by choice, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." Silence. Then slowly, Mr. Kim, the old soldier who'd known Hyun-woo, began to clap. Others joined, not everyone, not the old guard who couldn't adapt, but enough to matter. The grandmother's smile, small but real. Then she looked at Nala. "Welcome home, granddaughter. It's about time." 1 year later, Nala stood in front of a building that used to be a warehouse on Chicago's South Side. The neighborhood where her grandfather had died, broke and forgotten. Where he'd spent his last years in a nursing home that smelled like bleach and defeat, carrying secrets he'd never been allowed to speak. The building didn't smell like defeat anymore. The sign above the entrance read, "The Bennett Choi Center for Untold Histories." Glass and steel mixed with traditional Korean architectural elements, creating something that belonged to both worlds and refused to choose between them. Kang-min stood beside her, his hand warm in hers. He wore a suit, expensive, tailored, still dangerous looking, but he smiled more now, laughed easier, looked less like a weapon and more like a man who'd finally figured out he was allowed to be human. The crowd gathered for the ribbon cutting was massive. Press, community leaders, art historians who'd spent the past year cataloging the documents they'd uncovered, former soldiers who'd served with Marcus and Hyun-woo, here to finally witness their story told truthfully. And at the center of it all, the grandmother. She'd legally added Bennett to her name 6 months ago. Lee Sun-hee Bennett. Korean and American. Both and neither. Finally, after 88 years, completely herself. Her speech began with inherited wisdom. "My father used to say that history is written by the victors, but he was wrong. History is written by the brave, by the people willing to tell the truth even when silence is easier." She looked at Kang-min and Nala. "My grandson and his wife have given voice to a love that was buried for 70 years. They've honored not just my father and his beloved, but every person who's ever been told their love was wrong, their identity was shameful, their truth was too dangerous to speak." Wife. They'd gotten married 3 months ago. Small ceremony, no drama. Just them and the people who mattered, choosing each other in front of witnesses who actually wanted them to be happy. The grandmother cut the ribbon and the doors opened. Inside, the main gallery held the ancestral portrait. Nala had spent 6 months restoring it after the gunfight damage, carefully preserving every bullet hole as part of its history. It hung on the central wall, lit like the masterpiece it was. The new plaque beneath it read, "Portrait of Hyun-woo Choi and Marcus Bennett, 1953. Hidden within this painting is a code created by 2 soldiers who loved each other when the world said their love was impossible. They protected each other during war, built empires in peacetime, and carried their secret until death. This portrait honors not just their sacrifice, but their love, queer, interracial, and unbreakable. May we be brave enough to live the truths they had to hide." Around the gallery, they displayed the photographs, the letters, the evidence of a love that had survived war and prejudice and time itself. School groups would come here, learn about the Korean War through a lens that honored all the soldiers, not just the ones who fit comfortable narratives. Kang-min pulled Nala close as they watched visitors explore the space. "Think they'd be proud?" he asked quietly. She thought about her grandfather dying alone, carrying the weight of a love he'd never been allowed to claim. Thought about Hyun-woo building an empire to fill the hole Marcus left behind. thought about all the years they'd lost to shame and fear. "I think they'd be relieved," she said, "that we got to have what they didn't." He kissed her temple. "We almost didn't." "But we did." She turned in his arms, looked up at the man she'd met holding a gun in her studio a year ago, the man who'd become her partner, her husband, her choice. "We fought for it. That's what matters." The grandmother announced with a cane now, but still formidable. "The university called. They want to establish a fellowship in Marcus's name, full funding for students researching untold histories." "Tell them yes," Kang-min said immediately. She smiled. "I already did." As the sun set over Chicago, casting golden light through the center's windows, Nala thought about the voiceover she'd recorded for the documentary that would premiere next month. The story of how a painting led to a revolution. How love hidden for 70 years finally found the light. "They told us our love was impossible," she'd said into the microphone. "A scandal, a betrayal of tradition. But the real betrayal was burying truth to preserve comfort. We chose differently. We chose each other. And in doing so, we honored the love our grandfathers never got to claim." On the wall, the portrait watched them. Two men in army uniforms, arms around each other, smiling like they had all the time in the world. They hadn't, but Nala and Kang-min did. And they weren't going to waste a single moment of it hiding. Kang-min's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining exactly like their grandfathers had in a photograph from 1953. "Ready to go home?" he asked. She looked at him, at the grandmother, at the center they'd built from secrets and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to let love lose. "Yeah, let's go home," she said. And they walked out together, into a future their grandfathers had dreamed of but never got to see. But they were living it for them, every single day. Dear gentle viewer, this creator really appreciates your support and loves you so much. Drop a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest in this story. Was it Nala discovering her grandfather's name in the painting? The kiss after the assassination attempt? The grandmother revealing her tattoo? Or that final scene at the Bennett Choi Center? I want to know what made you feel something. And tell me, where are you watching from? I love knowing this story about forbidden love, hidden histories, and choosing truth over tradition traveled across cities, countries, and continents to reach you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. More stories are coming. See you in the next story, Fierce Hearts and Midnight Dreamers. Until then, choose love, choose truth, choose brave.